join. Բարև ձեզ Նժդեջան։
Բարև, ոնց եք։
Շատ ուրախ ենք, որ միացաք մեզ։
Հա, ձեր այդ Instagram-ի բանը շատ հետաքրքիր է, որ ամենն էլ տեսնում են կարծեմ, չէ։
Այո, շնորհակալություն։ Pixar-ից եմ օգտվել։
Վերև տանեիք կմտնեիք Instagram-ի։
Okay։ Ինչ եք ասում։
Մի քիչ այդ շրջը frame-ը վերև տանեիք Instagram-ից, ծիրուն կմտնեիք Instagram-ի։
Չի լինի, գետնին է դրած։ Ես պիտի սենց նստեմ։ Ես հուսով եմ սենց zero attend-ի չի լինի այսօր։
Դուք միացեք, որոշին իմ կողմս էլ այնտեղ միացնեմ, ուզում ես
Հա։ Հա։ Բայց կախում եք, ձեր ձենը կախում է, դի վատա։ Ես հեսա կգրեմ իրան։
Ուզում եք կամ դուրս, ստեղ կարծեմ։ Իմ ձենն է կախում։
Հա, կամ էլ այս կոմպը չգիտեմ։
Սպասի։ Ձայնս ոնց է։ Ես ձեր ձայնը չունեմ։ Հա, mute եք։ Hello, Sami. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, how are you?
Good, good. You? Are we public or are we in a training session?
No, we are still waiting, I guess, for the. Is it public already?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it is
Yes.
public.
Yeah.
Hi, Sami.
Okay.
Hello.
But we don't usually have many attendees in Zoom. Most people are watching from Facebook because you are going to be live streamed in Facebook.
Okay, no worries.
But we normally start at 3 sharp.
Okay, you can hear me, see me very well. All is good?
Yes.
Yes, all is good.
Okay. I got so many people asking about the session after I posted yesterday.
Yeah, we saw that. Let me arrange the live stream already. No, we still have 5 minutes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Nejde Hovanesian, the entrepreneur in residence at EPIC. Thank you very much for joining us today. As you may already know, the ESF 2020 was organized by the joint efforts of EPIC at AUA, EU for Business, and also GIZ. In this session, we will have a chance to talk with Sami Abou Saab from Beirut. Sami is currently the CEO of Speed, a tech accelerator based in the Beirut Digital District that empowers software startups to succeed and scale globally. He has been in this role since July 2015, and during his tenure, he officially launched Speed and recruited 6 batches with a total of 42 startups to accelerate. Part of his role has been mentoring startups in Lebanon and the MENA region and help them grow in the early stage. Sami has more than 15 years of experience in technology, both in startups and big tech firms. Prior to Speed, he worked at Skype and Microsoft Corporation in the US, covering strategy, marketing, and channel modeling. In Silicon Valley, Sami started his own company, Mobiluck, which was voted as the best startup in the Berkeley MBA program's entrepreneurship class. Sami holds a bachelor in computer and communications engineering from the American University of Beirut and an MBA from Berkeley's Haas School of Business. Good afternoon, Sami. First of all, I would like to express our sincere thanks and gratitude for accepting our invitation to this talk, despite the recent disastrous situation in Beirut. I honestly hope that your beautiful city will rise from these ashes even more lively and colorful than before in the very near future. Today's talk is going to be around the question of how to attract best fit investors. I'm going to facilitate this talk by asking Sami from a list of questions commonly raised by startuppers in their encounter with the question of investment and investors. Sami, would you like to start with a preface before moving to our questions?
Sure.
Okay.
First, thank you for having me and for giving me this opportunity to share my experience and knowledge with your audience on this particular topic that I've seen going on with more than 42 startups that went through our accelerator in Beirut. And talking about Beirut and all the things that are happening here, I'm also happy to be able to join you today, given all what happened. Many people lost their lives, many people lost their homes. I'm one of the lucky ones who did not lose his life, but also got impacted, and my home actually got damaged as well. Still, I think life continues, and we should remain strong and think about the positives and how we can build from here and not to go back to what happened. So with that, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or the audience would have, and to try to bring all the value I can to this discussion.
Okay, we will start just from our questions that we have prepared, and then we will move also to Q&A channel that our audience have access to. So we will have their questions also, we will raise the questions. Okay, first of all, from your point of view, in which stage is it preferable for a startup to begin looking for an investor? From which stage?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So many of the entrepreneurs we encounter and meet have this question in mind, like, should we start fundraising from day one? Should we start fundraising after we have a product? Should we start fundraising when we get revenue? Well, there is no right or wrong answer for that. You can fundraise at any stage when you need the money. And this is something to keep in mind. Some people are able to fundraise millions of dollars just based on an idea and the business plan. And some people sometimes fail to raise a penny, even though they have revenue and traction. So there is no set rule for that. It's about you figuring out exactly what's the target kind of product you want to have, and what's your story, what's your end goal, and how you're trying to achieve that. Now, the more you delay your fundraising, sometimes the better it is for your evaluation. But at the same time, this is not what you should be aiming for all the time, because in many cases, you would need the money early on, and the value creation you would get from getting an early on investor many times outweighs the value of waiting and increasing your valuation. That investor might be strategic. They might bring to the table a lot of expertise, money for you to build and grow your team, might accelerate your process to get you to the
Unfortunately, it seems that we have been disconnected from Sami. Let's see.
Hello? Yes.
Sami, you have been disconnected.
Yeah, it's something with the connection here. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, I was saying, so sometimes by getting an early investor would create value in not only the money, but also accelerating the growth and getting you to even much more higher valuation and more traction much faster. And that time to market might be crucial for the success of the startup.
Okay, thank you. So from your point of view, what are the main, actually, we were talking about stages. What are the main stages of investment in the startup life cycle? So from your point of view, actually.
So typically, most startups start by what we call the FFF, or friends, family, and fools. And these are the ones who would come and help you in the beginning, sometimes without any condition even. They just want to support you and see you succeed, and they bring everything they can to the table, whether it's the money, the connections, the buying your product, all kind of things. Those come usually at the very early stage. You might have nothing and you go to them. And this is not part of the phases, I would say, or stages of investment. Now, the more official and structured phases start typically at the pre-seed level. And at the pre-seed, the startup has either an idea or a product, but does not have any traction or customers. And the pre-seed usually is some angel investor. It could be an incubator, an accelerator, and it could be also some of the previous money who put money with you, as the triple F I mentioned. Now, after you proceed to the seed, this is when you got a product, you have some revenue, and you want to take over your local market. And this is where the seed stage comes in. And that's where you would seek a bigger investment, hopefully. And you would want to be securing the local market and getting enough traction for you to expand more internationally and globally. Now, and that's where comes Series A. Series A is for a startup who secured their market. They were able to show that they have good traction in that market. They are able to show that people are willing to pay money for the product. And then eventually you want to grow this outside of that starting market. And that's where Series A comes in. And then after that stage, now depending on the growth, the R&D, and so many other things, you start running into Series B, Series C, and so on, until you go public one day and do an initial public offering or IPO, or until you get acquired by another bigger player, or you can self-sustain and grow on your own indefinitely in that sense. So these are kind of typical stages. And sorry, one point on that, there is no defined amount of money on those stages. It so much depends on the market. It depends on the idea, the product, and so many things. So many people ask me, like, how much should I raise at the seed stage? Well, it's not about how much you should raise. It's more about how to look at your how much you're going to give away in terms of equity. And that's more a defining also number. You should not be losing more than 20 to 25% in every round. That's starting seed and onwards. Pre-seed is particular. Usually you should not be losing more maybe than 5 to 10% in earlier stages.
Okay, thank you. Actually, today the previous talk was about the startups support entities like incubators and accelerators, and you mentioned that you mentioned about accelerators and incubators also. I want to know what is the role of these startup support communities or entities in attracting investors.
Yeah, so an accelerator or an incubator, and I would distinguish between the two very quickly, even though the distinction might be blurred in so many markets.
Yeah.
Typically, an accelerator invests cash for equity and has a limited period of time in which it supports the startup through a programmatic approach. Whereas an incubator does not have to invest, they sometimes take money for them to offer services like mentorship and others. And it is not limited by time, it depends on how much time the startup needs. So those roles, and the second thing to talk about before answering your question is that an incubator and accelerator might not be the good fit for everyone. Some entrepreneurs and startups and founders are just good on their own, and they don't need an incubator or accelerator, and that's completely fine. They can jump directly sometimes to a VC and get a Series A or even a seed investment from an angel and then go to Series A without the incubator and accelerator. But that said, that's not everyone, especially when we are in a new upcoming market, similar to the markets we deal with like in Lebanon, in the Middle East, in Armenia, and the CIS countries. So there, I don't see this as being something that's not needed. In many cases, the entrepreneurs and the new founders require this kind of ecosystem and support around them from those accelerators. Their role is multifold. First, I think there is an educational role by providing the actual skill set and the basics of knowing how to do a lean startup, of understanding the basics of a business plan, projections, how to pitch well in front of investors on stage, prepare the pitch deck, all these kind of programmatic approach that an accelerator brings, that many entrepreneurs did not get the chance to learn these, whether at school or in their other kind of endeavors in life. The second aspect is potentially to open them access to markets and making sure that these startups can access customers who are willing to pay money for their products and expose them to those, whether locally or internationally. I'll give a small example maybe about what we did here at Speed that highlights how this is important in a second. And third is the access to investors. And this is the #1 KPI that an accelerator is measured by. How many startups or how many rounds of financing happened after the accelerator and what's the amounts there? Because this secures the next round and the growth of the startup based on bigger investors who have much more bandwidth and capacity to come and help the startup grow and reach next levels. And just to give you an example about access to markets, for instance, at Speed, what we did with Time is that we partnered with multiple international organizations, and some of them are in Silicon Valley, like a Lebanese diaspora community called Lebnet, or others like Techstars who are around the world. We became their partners in 2018. They have locations in more than 50 places around the world, and we can refer startups to their programs. We also, for instance, are the ambassador of SeedStars, a Swiss-based entity in Beirut. We did a MENA summit with them in 2018 here in Beirut, so that also gave exposure to our local startups and to so many in the region to access new markets. And last but not least, we are part of the Global Accelerator Network, which is based in Boulder, Colorado, in Denver, in Colorado. And this one actually has 110 accelerators part of the network and allows us to exchange mentors, investors, and even sometimes do some exchange to the locations of these accelerators to help the startups. Like right now, they're helping us a lot in this current situation in Lebanon to send our startups to other places and open them new markets.
Actually, you answered one of our questions that there is no need to go through, definitely, to go through an incubator or accelerator to attract investment.
Correct. Some people are good at it naturally, and that's completely.
But shall we consider the accelerator as an investor itself?
It is an investor, but the investment coming from an accelerator should not be placed as an investment round that's giving evaluation for the startup, because the accelerator is in the numbers game. They have to accelerate as many startups as possible in the fastest possible way and give them the most value they can. That said, they don't have room to have a full investment team and do evaluation on every investment and then assess the stage of the startup, because startups joining an accelerator are not always at the same level or same team or same market they're looking at. So they might have different valuations, but the accelerator does not have room to negotiate those, at least in our case. It's very structured. So what we tell people is that, yes, we're investing that much in cash, that much in kind, we're taking that much equity, but don't go and fundraise based on our value of money to equity ratio, because this is not a market valuation, this is a structured valuation that does not convey the actual value of the startup. The actual value might be higher or might be even lower, but we're completely fine with that.
Okay, thank you. From your point of view, what is the most effective way to attract or approach or get connected to an investor? So, from startuppers' side, I would say.
Yeah. So I think definitely going through a program like a university program, an accelerator, an incubator, all kind of places where you have a community around you that are part of the local ecosystem is definitely important to meet investors. And in the past, before Corona and lockdowns, I used to encourage people to go to events and activities organized by startup communities to meet more and more investors. But that said, funny enough, and after Corona, investors are much more approachable in different ways than they used to be in the past. So today, if you go to their website, get their name, their email, contact them, you'll probably hear a much higher rate of answers than you would have from before, that's for sure. So don't be afraid of going on LinkedIn, on the websites of VCs, of potential investors you have known of. Ask around you who are those investors, and then call them or get a warm introduction if you can. And you can definitely reach out to them, schedule a Zoom call like this one, and eventually fundraise with them. We've seen many of this happening. We actually have 2 startups, and the third one now in the last phase of closing a round during the lockdowns here, and this all happened virtually without any in-person interaction.
Okay, actually we have a question from one of our audiences. How critical is the role of the investor pitch in the final decision?
So here goes the story about the deck or the investor deck, I guess. That's the investor pitch in this case.
Yeah.
So the storytelling and why you're fundraising and the actual fundamentals behind that are very important. And at the early stage, the fundamentals of any startup is or are the team itself and the individuals on that team, how good they are, how much they can work together, and their ability to execute on the idea of the startup. And the second part of the pitch deck, which is very important, is the market. Now, the role of the pitch deck is debatable how important it is, because it's not about the actual pitch and the deck itself. It's more about an exercise to see who is the best fit investor for you. And that exercise does not always reside in the story you're going to tell in a pitch deck that is well structured, well thought of, and has all the numbers. So many times it's about the interactions and the chemistry that the investor feels with a certain founder, their ambition, their drive, their passion, their experience, and how much these founders are coachable and willing to listen to feedback. And this many times creates a huge value compared to just having a pitch deck that looks nice and that has all the good things. And getting an investment does not rely only on that. It's technically a dating exercise. You have to meet the investor 10 times and ask them about so many things and let them get to know you as well. in your good days and in your bad days, and make sure that they can actually work with you in both situations. And then they will trust that, and they will eventually be investing in you. So I think that that's a long answer for that.
Okay, my next question will be much more interesting, I guess, from this point of view, from a pitching point of view. Which one is much more important, idea or team, from an investor point of view?
It's the team. It's always the team. And I'll tell you kind of in priority order what's the most important to the least important. So team is number one, and I would repeat this 10 times. Team, 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 team. Like nothing beats the team and the value of the team. Number two is not the idea. Number two is the market you're tackling. If you're in a small niche market that's not growing or declining, whatever your idea is, it won't be interesting. And then last but not least is your idea. It's that much down in the priority list. The idea is the last thing to judge, because many times if you have a great team and you're tackling the right market, then the idea itself can be tweaked, can be changed, you can pivot, you can align with the market needs depending on that.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to the types of investors. The major types of investors, which types of investors do we have usually, and what's their major differences?
Yeah, well, that's a great question actually. So typically you have angel investors, that's one type. You have institutional investors who are either venture capital funds or sometimes corporates who want to invest with you. And you have the bigger ones who eventually could be private equity or government funds and others who want to support and invest in startups. This is if we're talking about equity financing, meaning investing in return for shares in your company. Of course, there is always the loan, which in the case of a startup is not the best idea. But some people that are so sure that they will generate some revenues might take a small loan to bridge a certain gap in financing, and that's completely okay. So these are kind of four different things to look at. Now, the investors who are angel investors usually are much more hands-on and involved in the startup. It's their personal money they're putting in this, and they're doing it because they can contribute strategically to the startup and bring value. But this also has its kind of downside, which is that means that also they will be very picky. They will have higher maybe conditions than a typical VC. They might require more traction to invest. They might require more security in some cases because it's their personal money. Now, there are the institutional ones, and I mentioned VC, corporate, and of course, accelerators as well constitute that, because it's an institution, it's a private entity, but it's a different category than typical VC. So the accelerators, the good thing about them that they provide you a major support in terms of program and kind of access to mentors, investors, and know-how. Maybe the downside of an accelerator, and I've experienced this, and it's all right to admit that there is also a downside, is that sometimes the structure or the kind of program might not be the best fit for everyone. And then the accelerator program might not be as relevant to some startups as I think it is. That's why I say the startup has to be a good fit to join a program. Then you go to the VC, and the VC, it's more structured. They have an investment team. They have market research. They provide strategic value. Sometimes they don't. They enter as a silent investor because they see a good opportunity. And at the same time, a VC has the potential and opportunity to follow on, meaning they can invest in later rounds. And it's always a good sign to have them carry their investments in future rounds. And last, the corporates. Sorry, and one point to mention about VC is the pros and cons. The pros is that they have deep pockets, so they can always invest. They can bring also strategic value if it's the right VC with the right kind of industry expertise. The downside of a VC is that they might not be as connected or hands-on with the startups, depending on the culture of the VC. And that's why it's important to choose the right one. Now we jump to the corporate investors, and these are corporates. It could be companies major like Microsoft, like Apple, Facebook, you name it, or it could be small ones that have a smaller bandwidth. And these are investing in you because they see you as a strategic product for their business. So either they can collaborate with you and grow the value they provide with other products, or they can acquire you one day and have you part of their offerings. Or they can just give you access to their customers. Like, for instance, an example, I know this one well, Microsoft has a co-sales activity, and they can provide startups, for instance, with a sales force to go sell their products to their existing Microsoft customers, which is pretty interesting for some startups. So the good thing about the corporates, you know that if they invested in you, that there is a strategic angle there, and that's important. The downside is that once you have a corporate investor on board, you have to be careful that they don't put conditions or things that limit your growth from you going and selling the same product to either competitors or other market players, that they don't allow you to do that. So that's important to keep in mind. These are, I think, top of mind kind of type of investors, and advantage and disadvantage of each. But
so what types of investments are quite common these days and also favorable from the investor's point of view?
What type of investment?
What types of investment?
Okay. What do you mean by what type in this case?
What type of investment?
Okay, you mean between equity or loan or?
Yes, from an investor point of view.
Yeah, so I think investors in the startup world are people who are in it to take some risks and have high returns. So ideally, they want to do equity financing, because if they invest in a startup and the value grows into like 10 times, 20 times, then they would have made their money much bigger. But at the same time, they'll be taking the risk of losing the whole amount, because many startups fail, and then the whole money has no value anymore. But typically, good investors are the ones who are risk takers and willing to go in it either all in or just like make it or break it technically.
Yeah.
Now, some of them do convertible notes, and that's an interesting aspect, and it's important at the early stage, because what's a convertible note? It's technically a loan, but instead of the startup returning the loan, the startup will convert that investment into equity at a future round when it raises more money at hopefully a higher valuation, and it will give the first investor who gave that loan some special treatment in terms of discount and the equity they're taking, or meaning they get more equity, or in terms of preferential rights or other kind of things that the investor asks for. The downside of a convertible loan is that if you don't actually get the next round, you will be liable in a way or another to return that money to the investor. Loan financing is not something that's very typical for startups. It's more for the startup to make that decision, and they would only make it when they see a clear gap that if they fill it, they will return that money very fast. It's not something that's very much advisable. And actually, I'm going to answer on my way one of the Q&A questions about investing your own money in the startup.
Actually, yeah.
We get this a lot, that the founders are so passionate and they want to invest their own money. This is very tricky. First, if you invest your own money, I'll give you the rules of that before talking if it's a good or a bad thing. Investing your own money means you have to invest as a convertible note, because you cannot set your own valuation, knowing that there are other investors coming into the capital table of the company. So you cannot tell them that, oh, I put that much money and I want that much equity. No one would accept that. So it has to be a convertible note and valued at another investor's rate. That's one. Two, it's a very risky move, but also it shows a lot of commitment. So what I would tell to founders, unless this is money that you are really willing to lose, even if it's your own startup, probably don't invest it, because you'll be multiplying your risk in an exponential way. You'll be so much emotional about then the startup moving forward, and
it will be much more emotionally engaging, actually.
exactly. And even if the startup like seems to be failing at some point, you might not let go, invest more money. It becomes like gambling at the end, and you don't want to get to that. So if it's a small amount, it's money you're willing to lose, and you don't have any emotional attachment to that money, it's all right. Don't set any valuation with that money. You cannot. It's not okay. And do it only with small, rational amounts. Don't double down with your own money.
Okay, the next question is actually, is it the investment, is it just about getting money or something beyond that? What is much more important? Actually, what are the top 3 most important criteria from a startupper's point of view for choosing an investor?
Look, choosing an investor is extremely important from a strategic standpoint. You don't want to get an investor who's a completely silent investor, whose goal is only to make money on your back and on the back of your success. You want an engaged investor, someone who is putting the money and bringing strategic support and angle to the startup, and who's willing to bring expertise and people in the field who know the industry of your startup very well so that they can create value for you. Now, the top 3 things I would say that are important part of an investment are definitely the expertise of the venture capital or the investor in general in the industry of the startup. This is number 1. And this would bring a lot of strategic value for the startup on the short and long term. Number 2, choosing an investor is also choosing a partner that you're going to be working with for 5-10 years sometimes. So it's very important that there is the right fit, chemistry, and work relationship, and that their conditions are kind of acceptable and would keep value for the subsequent investors. You don't want an investor today that kills the value of your startup that you cannot bring any more investment in the future. And number 3, maybe it's even number 2, number 3 for me, it's their access to markets and their network. The network of a VC is one of the most important things you want to look at. You want a VC who's able to connect you to future round investors, that they cannot invest in you themselves, so they need to bring you bigger investors who are willing to invest in you. And you want them to actually be able to connect you to customers and new markets, and eventually have the right network to fulfill an exit one day. And a good VC would have that because they want to exit their own investment themselves, so they need to find the next stage of investment and exit. And it also secures you some outcome one day from the startup, whether you exit with them or you stay on board, at least there is value creation in the process.
So overall, you're talking about this, what usually is being called as smart money.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We have a question actually from you mentioned about the investment is more than getting money. You mentioned about that. Can you give some tips on how to establish strong connection with investors?
Yeah, so I think there is one sales trick that works even with investors and everyone else, I think, in any negotiation or business discussion. And that trick is try to get the person, their background, where they're coming from, and eventually create empathy and a strong link with those people. It always makes a huge difference when you're talking to a potential investor, is that you are able to establish a personal connection, a personal link. It could be that they went to the same school. It could be that they have a passion for the same sports. They have the same hobby. It could be there is a geographical connection. They come from the same city or town. It could be so many things that you will be surprised how much these create value in the discussion and creates a link, and that make you more likable and more connected to that investor in particular. So researching the person and the people from the investment firm or the angel investor or whoever it is extremely important before the first meeting. It sets the right kind of tone and impression, because first, they know you spend time and effort to get to know them, and that would make them listen and care much more. And second, it establishes a link that makes you much more memorable than just you being one of those startups they met. You will become, oh, that's the startup that actually plays basketball, and I'm a basketball player. That's a startup that comes from Yerevan and also was born and raised there, or whatever kind of link you can bring in that sense. So these are always very important. Second trick is try to have also a memorable story. And the memorable story sometimes comes from very basic things. It could be about how you met your co-founder and why you are passionate about a certain idea. It could be that you don't be afraid of sharing personal things, even if that makes you a bit vulnerable, because that's what makes you connect with others. Being vulnerable is not a bad thing, unlike where in many cultures, being vulnerable might be a sign of weakness. At the contrary, it's not a sign of weakness. It means that you are confident enough that you allowed someone into your inner circle and shared a vulnerability that allows them to understand where you're coming from. We had a startup at Speed, to give you an example, where the founder was diabetic. And his startup was about solving a problem for diabetes, to help people manage their like daily behavior around food and insulin and other things in a smart way. And he used to go on stage, and this made everyone connect with him when he used to say that sentence. He would say to people, I will live, on average, I will live 8 years less than you. And that's because I'm diabetic. And that sentence on its own, like, I still remember it, and that was 3 years ago when he was pitching this. So if I still remember his pitch, it tells you how memorable it was, because he was telling people, hey, I'm going to live 8 years less than you. And it's a personal thing because I am diabetic, but at the same time, I'm passionate, and that's why I'm solving for this problem.
Okay, that's very interesting. So is there any, let's say, so-called template for matchmaking procedure of startups and investors? Is there any standard way for doing this matchmaking, or it happens based on chance? Or
well, again, I think there are some things to look at, but there are also other things that you cannot discover until you meet with the investor. Actually, I'll quote someone here I met in one of the gatherings of the Global Accelerator Network, and he said there is no such thing as no investor wants to invest in you. It's because you have not found the right investor yet, because there is an investor for every startup. That's what the guy was telling us. And I believe this is true, and this means it's a numbers game. So there is the aspect of connecting, creating empathy, and showing your passion, but there is also the aspect of playing the numbers game, which means in practice, you have to reach out to as many investors you could meet on the planet to try to get them to invest in you. They could be located in your region, in Armenia or in CIS. They could be diaspora, by the way, who just want to give back, and that's a major angle, never to forget the diaspora, because they probably are a bit well off from the local market. They are succeeding in other places. They bring access to other customers, and they are strategic in many ways. So I think that's one of the best tips, is that you have to keep looking, never give up, and make sure that your story makes sense. You have something that people want. If you're going into it and thinking that you're not that confident about it, the investor will feel that and will smell it, and they will not be that excited about you. So be confident. That's one thing I would tell you.
Okay, thank you. So let's say that as a startupper, I got the investment.
Yeah.
What is going to be life after investment process? What does it change what happens after investment phase?
Well,
How life is going to be different after investment?
there are two things. So an investment is a start of something, not the end of it. So it's the end maybe of the investment, searching for investment. So you're done searching for the investment, but it's the start of the serious work and the commitment and the more monitoring you have from that investor on your back for every step and every move you make. So it's crucial and extremely important that you execute really well. So the key word here is execution, because now you have the money, you have the support, and you have no...
And you have a commitment also.
You have a commitment, of course, major commitment.
Extra commitment, actually, because you have started with another kind of commitment as an entrepreneur, and now you have a commitment to your investor also.
Exactly. So it's beyond you making or breaking it for your own sake. It's also there is some other person now or company that is waiting for the outcome of your work and that they want to see it succeed. So the amount of pressure goes up after the investment. It doesn't go down. And typically an investment is for around 18 months. So you have in the next 12 months, you have a small room to breathe and execute, but you have to be executing like crazy. This is where the bulk of the work happens. But then in 12 months, you're going to start fundraising for the next round. Okay, so there is this other angle that you have to keep in mind, that it's not done today and that's it. Unless this was a major round and you're going to become profitable after this round, then you're going to be fundraising in 12 months from now. What else happens after investment? It's when things start mattering on the measurement side and monitoring, and you have to keep communication is key. We have something we see with many startups. They finish the fundraising, whether with us or other investors, and then after they do that, they disappear, and then you have to start following up with them to tell you what's happening. But they miss on a very important point, if that they were, even if things were going wrong, we want to know, because we could help make them right.
Yeah, definitely.
If they're going right, we can help them even more, make them even more right. So it's not that we're here as investors to be like the bad guy. We're at the contrary, part of their team. Whatever value we can bring, we're going to bring it. We're not going to be an obstacle to their growth or success, at the contrary. And that's something very important to keep in mind, that your investor is your partner. It's like you're getting into a marriage, and you have to keep sharing and communicating in that marriage. Otherwise, they would assume that something is not going right.
Okay. So we have another question. You mentioned the second important thing for investors is the market. If the startup wants to target international market, would the investors be more prone to invest in that startup, or they prefer much exact and scalable market?
That's a great question, actually. And I'll tell you how to think about that. And the best example I can give you is if you think of Uber. And why am I talking about Uber? So when you go to an investor and you want to fundraise, you have to have short-term vision, you have to have a medium-term vision, and the long-term vision. For the short-term vision and in the early stage, you want to be in a realistic market and achievable market. You don't want to tell the investor at the very early stage that your first goal is to go win the United States, European, and Asian market all together in one shot, because that is not possible. No one will believe you, and you would lose their trust from the first sample. But if you tell them, hey, look, my short term is to actually acquire my local and market in Armenia, CIS, Middle East, whatever is your local market. And then after I acquire that market and I prove that the customers need this, I have figured out that there are 2 or 3 other major markets that I want to tackle that are more international. One of them is in Southeast Asia, and the other one is in Latin America. And they're that big, and they're gonna make us that much revenues or profits or whatever numbers you want to put on the table, or they're gonna acquire us that many users, then it's more believable. And that's exactly what Uber did. Uber started by being the black taxi company for San Francisco. And by black taxi, it meant a bit more the luxury taxi service that's on demand using an app, and that's based on San Francisco and California only. And then they said, okay, our next step is to go to more US market. And then the next step is to go international. And then this kept growing with them. And then initially they were in the service of being a taxi company for people. Now they became a food delivery company. They might become also a shipping or freight delivery company because they have the technology platform, they have the algorithms, they have everything that's needed to be efficient and on demand in doing that kind of thing. So they could be a truck delivery service, they could be a human delivery, it could be food delivery, they could be delivery of anything you could think of. And that's how you should think of your business. What are the next steps on the geography and what are the next steps on the product? And it's okay to start with a small market as long as you have the vision for the next bigger steps.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, actually. The first one is, are there any famous startups that we may know accelerated in speed?
You might have heard of Thinkers, SYNKERS. It's the startup that does the marketplace for matching tutors with students, and it got coverage in Lebanon, UAE, and looking at other markets right now, like Saudi Arabia. They just finished the Series A recently, and they're growing pretty well. That's one. There is also another one that's actually, the founder is Lebanese Armenian, and who also has a team in Armenia working on it. It's called Lemonade Fashion.
Yeah,
And
actually, we know
yeah,
that.
so you probably know the founder, Arthur Bizdikian.
Yeah.
This startup is actually providing designer clothes that are custom made, but also at affordable prices for the masses. So that's what they're doing. I guess these two would be top two that you might have heard of as famous.
Thank you. And Svetlana is asking, what kind of startup should be attract to attract attention? More creative or profitable?
So I think profitable always wins, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
So no investor would think twice about a profitable startup. But that said, it's not the right thing to tell founders and startups to only focus on profit, because you could be building something that requires a couple of years before it becomes profitable. And this is particularly the case, especially that I know the talent in Armenia is focused many cases on deep tech. And deep tech might require a couple of years to build. So it's okay if you spend the first couple of years building a really good product, as long as you know that it's going to have a commercial outcome at some point and you're going to be able to generate revenues and profits. That said, still, I would say that even if you're building something that's in deep tech, do not try to build a perfect, idealistic product that has all the features from day one. Focus on one feature that really works and that will make people pay money for it. And then you can grow the startup and get other features and more profitable on the long term.
Okay, thank you. I think that you have answered all my questions and also the Q&A questions that we have got. We have a new question actually from Galia. After the pandemic, can we assume that investors are more prone to invest in health tech startups because health tech can be a challenging sphere?
Well, we had a debate on this recently. I was on another talk, and it's a good question. So yes and no, because if you're not in health tech and you're investing there, it's not the right thing to do. So if you're an investor and you suddenly saw that there is this pandemic and you want to invest more in healthcare because many people are looking at it, if you have no strategic value there, it might not be the right thing to do. I think where you should look at more and more, and that's where I think it's a longer term good strategy to think about what industries that will have more investments. Corona, pandemic, and all what happened forced many people to work from home and remotely. And this encouraged a lot of productivity tools to rise and shine. And clearly Zoom is one of them that we're using right now. Yeah. And their stocks in the markets have skyrocketed because the revenues also skyrocketed due to people being forced to use this. So think about this for a second in a particular way, which is what the pandemic and Corona did by forcing people to work remotely and being at home. It accelerated a disruption that people were trying to do for a long time. Many people were pushing for people to be able to work anywhere, anytime, remotely, on their phone, on their laptop, anywhere. Many people were trying to enhance productivity by giving flexible tools that are on the cloud and on the go. There are so many things that were happening in education and learning to try to push people for online and e-learning. And those things required a lot of effort to convince and make people aware that they're the right thing to do because they're easier, more agile, more practical, whatever you want to call it. And then the pandemic came in, and all this kind of disruption that was going to take 3 to 5 years was done in 3 months. And suddenly it was okay for anyone around the world to have their employees working from home, not to have regular work hours, but to be flexible work hours, not to have vacation days, but to have like, you can take as many vacations as you want as long as you execute. In the US, many of those companies in the tech industry already had these flexibilities. And when the pandemic came, they actually cut a lot on the office space and the costs. And they said to all employees, we're going to give you an extra work from home benefit expense, and you can work from home up until end of 2021. Some companies allow their people to work from home up until end of next year. They're not requiring them to come to work or even be in an office. And I think this is where you need to think as well, that it's not only about health tech, which is important, it's also about productivity, remote working, communication.
About the whole disruption actually that happened.
Exactly.
Okay, I guess we have reached the end of our session. Would you like to have a quick wrap up?
Well, sure, why not? Like, what I would say is that I would encourage everyone and all the people who are trying to build their startup and to go fundraise and look for investors, not to rush to an investor just for the money, to do your full research, make sure that the investor is the right one for you, and to make sure that this is someone or a company that you are willing to work with them for the next 5 to 10 years. It's similar to picking a co-founder, picking your investment fund or firm or your angel investor. It's very important that there is a good fit and the right chemistry, because this is a partner in your business and you want to make sure you are happy and okay working with them for some time.
Thank you, Sami. Thank you for your valuable participation. Thank you for your answers. Before ending the session, I would like to remind our audience that EPIC is already accepting the startup application for its fall 2020 incubation program. This year, for the first time, we give an opportunity for everyone to apply. For more details, please visit EPIC's website or our Facebook page. Follow our Facebook page. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Sami.
for having me. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.